actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's talk about taxes for a second. Now,
One loves talking about taxes.
I am, a hot take. I love paying taxes. I am all about the taxes. I think that, you know, it's a privilege to be able to pay into a system that works. I use the
Mm-hmm.
term work lightly,
Mm-hmm.
but I do feel very, I do feel like our taxes are a good thing.
So the government provides these things, and we pay them taxes. We pay them income taxes. We pay them sales taxes. We pay them property taxes, so that they can provide those things. Now, what I say to people is, you are you are paying these people. You are paying Congress. You're paying the president. You are paying your representatives, and you should demand things from them because you are paying their bills.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Saturday Evenings Posted Mostly presents General Chaos. With me, your host, Trevor Stewart, 1308. And this week we do have a special treat for you and a special guest coming up. But I'd like to start this evening with a couple of things from the news. First up, apparently this week at a hockey game. Oh, apparently this week, a hockey game broke out at a brawl between the New York and New Jersey ice fighting teams. That went terribly. But I also would like to talk about this week the first successful kidney transplant from a genetically modified pig to a human. And it worries me because I don't like to think that my bacon is getting closer and closer to being me. And I can see how artificial intelligence is going to interface with this because, they can build these blank bodies with by genetically modifying these pigs. Well, why not just download the intelligence of the AI into the genetically modified pig, upload yourself into the AI, and at this point, well, I, this is how you get. This is how you get. Um, I completely lost my thread there. Cybernetic pigs, zombie pigmen, cyber zombie pigmen. Jeez. I'm having a rough time with it this morning. This is live recording. So, warts and all. So let's move over to something else where hopefully somebody else can word better than I can today. Today we are joined by our special guest, Trilhala, who is going to tell us a bit about American civics. Hello, Trilhala.
Hi.
What do you have to tell us? Well, first, introduce yourself. Give us a little about yourself and why why you are qualified to speak on this subject.
I am a 7th grade civics teacher here in the great state of Virginia. So I've been teaching this to kids, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to teach this to other people.
And what age kids are you teaching at the moment?
7th graders are between the ages of 12 and 13, so newly formed teenagers.
May the gods bless you. This sounds like a frightening, frightening prospect to me.
It's
door
not
of
so
no.
much scary as they don't pay attention very well.
Mm.
Welcome to the conversation, Kat, our ASOC prod, who does most of the heavy lifting around here. So, we have, we've prepared a few questions for you, and we're going to see where that goes. Let's see if I am as smart as a 7th grader. First off, let's start with from the top down. How does our government work? 3 branches.
Yes. We have 3 branches of government. We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. The legislative branch is probably the largest with the most amount of power. That is your Congress with the Senate and the House of Representatives. That's where all of our laws get made. The executive is the branch of government that includes the president, the vice president, and their cabinet. And that is where all the laws are enforced. And we have the judicial branch, which is the lovely Supreme Court of the United States, which is where all of our laws get interpreted. So those are the branches of government that work together, or actually more separately, and they kind of hinder each other in order to work as a good government.
In a system we call checks and balances.
Yes, they each have abilities to make the other branch a little less powerful, such as the president has to sign any bills into law that the Congress manages to pass. However, if the president is reluctant to do such things, the Congress is able to overrule that veto with a 2/3 majority vote.
Which is also called
the
a supermajority.
Yes, which is a supermajority. Most majority votes are simple majorities, which is 51. Well, 51% of the vote is what I generally tell my kids, but it's really just the majority. So in the Senate, you have 100 senators. A majority would be 51 to 49, a simple majority.
And is the Senate set at 100 senators?
Yes, always. Every state, I mean, unless we include another state in our union, every state gets 2 senators and only 2 senators. So whether you're in Virginia or New Hampshire or California, there is only 2 senators from each state.
Okay.
Versus like the House of Representatives, which is more of a representative for the people. And that one varies depending on population. So if you live in a place like Wyoming, you might have 1 House of Representative member. You live in California, you have upwards of 40 to 50 of them because California has such a high population.
And how many do we have in Virginia?
We have, I believe at this time, 11.
11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they are split up in districts
Yes.
That
So if you were to go online, you could look up your state district map, and you could put in your address. And you can actually probably do this from the House of Representatives website, which is house.gov. You put in your address, and you can find which House member is actually your direct representative in the House.
and what will we all be voting for this coming November?
This coming November, we will be voting for the president, possibly some senators, depending on where you live, because senators come up every 2 years in cycles of three, because senators are reelected every 6 years. But because they don't want them all coming up for election at the same time, it comes in like 2 year cycles. So, 1/3 of the Senate will come up in this 2 years, 1/3 will come up in the next 2 years, and the last third will come up in 6 years from now. And then the House of Representatives is every 2 years. And I don't know if they are being reelected this year or not. But generally, they get reelected during, at least during the presidential election, and then in the 2 years in between the presidential election. So you'll be electing some new reps. You'll be electing a new president. There's going to be a lot of probably local and state things on your ballots as well, if any of those have come up, depending on your state. So you should definitely go and do your research and figure out what will be on your ballot this year, because generally it's more than just the president.
Where can people find out what's going to be on their ballot?
There's a lot of voting websites. I'm trying to remember what they're called. There's like some Vote Now websites. You can find through your state as well. You can go to the U.S. government's website as well and go to the House or the Senate, and you'll find voting ballots as well. You can look anywhere. You could just go to Google and go, saying you live in Washington, go Washington voting ballot 2024. And there's going to be a lot of organizations. So you're going to look for .org, a lot of organizations that will post those ballots. And if you are a Republican or Democrat, you can actually go and contact online your party, and they will give you a sample ballot as well, because they want to make sure that you vote as well this year.
I bet they do.
Very important for all of them. And if you are independent or undecided, I would say that it is even more important for you to go and research, because you have your views, and you should definitely be voting for the people who best meet your views. You're never going to find someone who meets your views completely, but if you know what the top one or two things are most important to you, you should definitely be researching your senators, your presidents, and your House of Reps, and even all the way down to the local level. It is very important to vote.
Well, now would be a good time to talk about the difference between a democracy, a true democracy, and a democratic republic or a representative democracy.
Yeah. So America is not a true democracy. We are a representative democracy. A true democracy is where all the citizens of a country cast direct ballots for any measure. You would be voting directly for your president. You would be voting directly for your Senate. You'd be voting directly for any laws that you were to put into place. It works really well in small groups of people. Back in ancient Greece, when not everybody was a citizen, and there was only like 700 people, and they could all gather together and cast their votes on all of these issues. Um, Now, when you have so many people, such as like with the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic, frankly, because they were a republic once, you have what's called a representative government, where you don't directly vote for measures or laws or even people all the time. You are only voting directly for your specific representatives. And in our government, that is currently your House of Representatives member and your senator. Those are the ones that you are choosing to represent you
On a federal level.
on a federal level. Now, on a local level, there are actually a lot for you to vote for. If you live in a city, you often have mayoral votes. If you live in a county or a parish or any of the smaller subdivisions of a state, you often have a board of supervisors of some sort that you are voting for. You also have school boards, which we have found have become very important. Um, so we do have a lot of representatives that we vote for on a regular basis. And it's important for you to make a valid decision for what you believe in, because they are going to be casting those votes for you.
Yeah, unless you disagree with our opinions, in which case don't vote.
Well,
We are
it's
not
not perfect.
we're not a news source here. We are
Yeah,
allowed to spin things however we want. If
that
you
is true.
if you disagree with us, if you think our opinions are wrong, then stay home. Don't vote.
I
Um,
mean, given that she just said it was important to go vote, disagreeing would be staying home, wouldn't it?
yes, it would
Yeah.
be. And that is a viable option. You can stay home if none of the choices are within your wheelhouse. I mean, if they're both somebody that you disagree with, you're unfortunately in America, your only choice is to vote third party or don't vote at all. And unfortunately, voting third party is often as successful as not voting at all.
It is third party votes. Third party candidates do have a history of uh, taking votes away from one of the major parties and affecting outcomes in that way. But we, especially on a federal level, don't have any history really of third parties gaining much traction
Correct. So there
since
is a
uh the current two-party system. We have to
yeah.
remember that the parties were not always what they are.
No, and as a matter of fact, George Washington was very against the idea of parties because it had shown its ugly head in many other um, countries at that point. Because parties have a tendency to divide people. But they do have a purpose. So third parties do not win elections. And yes, they do often ruin elections for one party or the other because they're taking votes away. But their purpose and the reason they do them is because they want to bring light to a cause that they have. So, like the Green Party with environmentalism and especially with global warming nowadays, there is a lot of move to. There was, especially during Ross Perot's time and back during the 80s and 90s, was a move to kind of show that things were going badly, and the best stage for that is often a presidential election.
Okay. So these third parties tend to run not out of any hope of actually winning, but
No, they know
bringing
better than that. They
attention,
know that they're not going to win.
right? Bringing attention to their cause.
Mm-hmm.
Ross
A
Perot
lot of this
makes
isn't
me think
because,
of Elmer
you know,
Fudd doing the hokey
he was,
pokey.
yeah. So the reason being isn't necessary. I mean, it is two-party system, but it's because it's a two-party system with an electoral college. And so, if you don't know what the Electoral College is, some of you might have heard of it and are probably ranting about it right now, whether you believe in it or not. It is a system where we don't directly actually vote for the president. Several elections, including the past Clinton Trump election and the, I'm trying to remember who was the other one. Was it Bush and Gore?
Yep.
I think so.
It was Bush,
Those two
Gore.
elections, yeah, Clinton won by over 1 million popular votes. However, that's not what matters in the end. In the end, each state is voting for electors. Now, what electors are is people who are going to vote for you in the Electoral College. So, say I'm in Virginia, I get 13 electors. And if Virginia goes majority for, say, the Republican or the Democrat, that is who those 13 electors are going to vote for. So
in a system called winner take all.
Winner takes all. There's only 2 states that do not have winner takes all. I believe it's Nebraska and Maine. Those 2 states, it goes county by county, and then the electors get divided up by percentage. So say half of your state wanted the Democrat and half of your state wanted the Republican, then if you have, say, 4 votes, 2 would go for the Democrat and 2 would go for the Republican. Now, that's actually a lot more fair than winner takes all, because then it goes county by county.
How are the number of electors per state decided?
So your number of electors is the number of senators you have, which is always 2, plus the number of House of Representative members you have. So we have 11 House representatives here in Virginia, plus 2 senators. So we have 13 electors. Now, DC actually finally I think it was actually a constitutional amendment. They got 3 electors during the presidential campaigns, because it was not that long ago that DC didn't actually have any ability to vote for the president. Like their numbers did not count. They counted in the popular vote, but they did not have any electors to cast that vote. So now we have 3 for DC as well.
Interesting.
The least amount of electors you can have is 3. The most is like California and Texas, which has got like 30 to 50 electors. So you can imagine that those states are important because they've got the most amount of people.
So yeah, it is essentially, it boils down to it is basically based on population.
Yes. But because it's a winner-take-all system, look at California, for instance. California generally votes Democrat now. And so all of their electoral votes go for Democrats. But there is a large population of California that is Republican, and their voices never get heard because it is a winner-take-all system. And same for Texas. Texas normally goes for Republicans.
In the presidential race. In the presidential race.
In the presidential race only is what we're
Only.
dealing with. Yes.
That is the only place the Electoral College comes into play, right?
Exactly.
Um, now, now, as we hear all of this, it would be easy for us to say, well, then what's the point of the Electoral College anymore? You know, we have ways of counting everybody's vote. Why can't we just do a popular vote?
So the reasoning for that is the smaller states would get overlooked. Smaller meaning in population. So smaller states still have electoral votes, and so they still get visited by presidential candidates because their votes are still important. But if it was based only on population, then people would be, spending most of their time in, say, New York or California or Texas in population centers in order to get the most bang for the buck. There's also the thought that the Electoral College is a stopgap if there's any voter fraud that starts to happen. So electors, um, if there's certain counties or certain things in the state that are going wrong and they know it's going wrong, then the electors can cast the vote against what the popular vote is.
right.
It's made as a stopgap. Now, a bit cynically, the reason it was created in the first place is because our founding fathers did not really have a lot of confidence in people's ability to vote correctly. So if you think of it that way, and we are a lot more educated now, we get a lot more information, possibly too much information now.
I want to
So
stop you real quickly, say hi to Retro Future now, and read out his comments. Hi, Retro. Good to see it. It all boils down to poopy, he says. All of it. The
all of
electoral
it.
scrotum.
I mean that is a popular opinion. Now, getting rid of the Electoral College isn't as easy as you think it is. It would have to be a constitutional amendment because it is in the Constitution. The easiest way to fix this without a constitutional amendment is to start demanding from your states a more fair split vote rather than a winner take all. And that way, certain counties, such as in Napa Valley in California, would get their vote, and people who are more liberal in such places as such San Francisco would also get their vote. So a split vote would make it a lot more competitive than a winner take all.
Retro says it doesn't matter if the poop gets overlooked as long as everyone's vote counts. It doesn't matter. We're all Americans. We have the technology for double encryption and 2FA.
I mean, we do tend to act like it is so easy to get around some of these voting systems, but
Right.
they are. Everybody is interested in keeping our vote safe.
Right.
Both sides are. So.
And to move on from voting, just wanted to touch on the Electoral College because it really bears very little. Well, to get away from the Electoral College, it has very little bearing on anything but the presidential race.
Correct.
And this, let's get back to, first off, the system of checks and balances again. And I'd like to talk about why it feels like the president has this outsized role Also, Retro says, we don't need states to be represented. We need Americans to be represented. Very true, sir. Very true. We can amend the Constitution. Let's effing do it. We can. Although, actually, this is in that checks and balances wheelhouse. How would we amend the Constitution?
In order to amend the Constitution, each state has its own ratification system. Generally, it's through their own house. Like in Virginia, we have the General Assembly, which is essentially set up a lot like the Congress. And they would vote on it. Now, if they voted for it, then Virginia would be a vote for it. And then you would have to get probably about 30 other states to agree with you. Actually, probably more than 30. I believe it is a supermajority. So it's getting a supermajority of states.
2/3 of the 50 states.
Of the 50 states to all go through ratification and agree to the proposed constitutional amendment. The last time that happened was Clinton in the 90s, and it wasn't even for anything very large.
What was it?
It was essentially for how Congress gets paid. It was something very, very minor.
Trust them to come together about their money, though.
Yes, exactly. The last time we tried something major in changes, which was a ratification for women's equality and rights in this country, it went on for several decades and finally failed in the late 90s. It did not get the votes it needed. So we have only had 27 amendments in the past 200 years, and 17 of those are all I'm counting because the first 10 were ratified within 3 years of the Constitution being made. So it's actually only been 17 constitutional amendments in the past over 200 years.
For a living document, this thing sure changes slowly.
Yeah, it's a zombie.
Jeepus. I am so glad we don't have a tongue twister today. I'm just tripping over my own teeth.
It is possible, but what you have to realize is that a lot of the reasons that people don't do it is not because they don't want it. It's because sometimes it's easier to find a different way. That's what happened with Roe v. Wade. We wanted those privacy laws. We wanted to have abortion as a constitutional amendment. However, the easiest way for us to get Roe v. Wade was to put it into a privacy decision for the Supreme Court, and we see how that worked out. So,
yeah,
you're right. A constitutional amendment would be more surefire, and it would be a lot harder to get rid of. But it's also a lot harder to get in the books in the first place. So
on to this oversized power that the president seems to have. And I feel like that kind of ties into the Supreme Court, because that power, I mean, it seems like our president's power comes from their cult of personality.
Well, yes, the president's power is most of his power is appointing people in our bureaucracy. So appointing judges, appointing people in agencies, appointing a lot of people that run the government. And if you are appointed by someone, you often feel like you owe that job to them, or even more so, you're being appointed because you're somebody that they think thinks like them.
Is loyal.
Yeah. Now, the Supreme Court issue is interesting because that's not always been true. Presidents have been duped by Supreme Court judges before and have tried to, elect someone that is conservative or liberal like them and have been surprised, to say the least, when they completely did not agree with them.
Do you have an example of that?
So during the civil rights, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, during the civil rights movement, a Supreme Court judge had been appointed by a conservative president before I believe it was before JFK. Anyhow, he was supposed to be conservative, and that judge went on to passing most of our largest equality judgments, like Brown versus Board of Education. And that was confounding for them. I mean, these people change, and sometimes they get caught up in the rhetoric itself. It was kind of hard to disagree with what was happening during that time. But when you help get somebody elected for the Supreme Court, you're kind of expecting them to kind of back you up.
Yeah. Oh.
Now, the way that this is supposed to go is the president puts somebody up for that position, but the Congress, the Senate, is supposed to look over that person and say if they are qualified or not. And it is up to the Congress to say no to a president. And as we know, the way party lines have been going recently with how partisan everything is, a lot of it depends on who runs the Senate at that point.
So again, the president's power versus their described power. Their real power is in influencing other people, influencing Congress, influencing voters who...
Their power is in their party.
Right.
So because the president is a representative of his party, if he has support of his party in the Senate, he can easily get somebody passed that he wants.
Right.
As we saw during the Trump era and how many people he got passed into the Supreme Court with very little problem.
I think that, yes. I think that Trump represents a slightly different form of the political beast, in that it's not about the party anymore. It really is about his cult of personality.
I mean, that does happen. You get a president who has a cult of personality that takes over the party, and the party then changes into something different. We've had that happen several times before. Not necessarily with a cult of personality, but parties do change over time. And this time it happens to be mostly due to the influence of one person. Now, the biggest problem with this Supreme Court is that there are nothing in the Constitution that dictates what they have to be. They don't have a how old they have to be. They don't have to be lawyers. They don't have to hold a job. They don't have to be from this country. Nothing. Whereas, to be in, say, the Senate, you have to be 30 years old. You have to be a resident of your state for a certain amount of time. You have to be from this country for a certain amount of time, and an actual citizen versus just coming over here and not being a citizen. None of that is required for a Supreme Court justice. But you have to also understand, in the Constitution, the Supreme Court was only the highest level you could go in a court case. Their ability of judicial review did not exist in the Constitution that was given to them essentially by them after a court case.
So they
Their ability to call something unconstitutional, which is called judicial review,
right.
came to them from a ruling after they ruled in a Marbury versus Madison case. They essentially said that you couldn't skip immediately to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that the law that Congress had passed that said that they could skip all the way to the Supreme Court unconstitutional. And since that time, they have been able to call things unconstitutional. And that is where most of their power comes from nowadays. And it is not in the Constitution.
It's a
It is
self-appointed
from,
power. It's a self-appointed power.
yes, it's what we would call, what is that, where from a previous case. So it's
Precedent.
Yeah, it's a precedent. Yeah. It's not a constitutional power. Judicial review is a precedent. They were never meant to have that power. They merely were meant to be the highest court in the land. So if, people kept appealing, that at some point it stopped.
Okay.
And now with judicial review, our Supreme Court now has all of these ability to overturn laws and overturn and call anything unconstitutional that the president does or that the Congress does.
So is there any check on the Supreme Court's power?
The checks on the Supreme Court's power is they are appointed by the president, and then they have to be accepted by the Congress.
But once they're in, there's no...
Once they're in, and they're in for life. Technically, they can be impeached. It's never happened.
Okay.
It hasn't happened, so we don't have
a precedent for it.
We don't even have a process for that because it's never happened before. It would have to be something that we started completely new. I mean, technically anybody can be impeached in the government because if you're not doing your job, you can ultimately be fired. No matter how powerful you are, that's called a rule of law. But when you are in the highest court of the land, it's kind of hard to get other courts to mess with you.
Yeah. Yeah, no one wants to take the case, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of people who want to take the case, but are they going to listen? And a lot of it is, it hasn't been a problem to a huge extent all the time. Normally there's no problems with the Supreme Court. They're handling basic everyday cases that nobody even really cares about.
And they are supposed to be an apolitical body. They're supposed to be...
But that's not even literally the only thing that the Constitution says about the Supreme Court is that they have to have good behavior, and they don't even outline what good behavior is. They drop the ball on the judicial branch. Yes.
Okay. So this is a loophole. We're seeing one loophole here. Also, how do we know how many Supreme Court justices there are supposed to be?
There's no number.
And so, if the Supreme Court isn't leaning in the direction that the president might want, the president can do what's called packing the court.
I mean, they can try to pack the court, yes.
But they'd
Because
need a majority in the Senate to
they would
get
need the Senate to, to agree with them. And if you don't
just
have,
a simple majority, not a supermajority.
I mean, correct. You just need them to agree with appointing a judge. Now, with packing, then you're going to run into all sorts of political issues with people, screaming at you or whatnot. But constitutionally, there's no number. Once upon a time, it was 6, and then we got to 9. And it's just traditionally been 9 for long enough that people think it's the correct amount. But there's nothing that, like I said, in the Constitution, there is very little written about what the Supreme Court is supposed to do, what it's supposed to look like, or any requirements whatsoever. If the president were to put up anybody, it doesn't matter who they are.
As
If
we
the
have
Congress is
seen.
okay with it, they will go for it. They don't have to know law to even be on the Supreme Court.
They don't even have to be a decent human being.
No, there's no requirements. They have to, the only thing is mentioning about good behavior, that they're supposed to be upright citizens, I guess, good behavior, but there's no
There's no
outline to
codifying
that.
of what good behavior is.
Correct. So it leaves too much amorphous thought of, well, is this bad behavior? Are they doing something wrong?
So what are the limitations on being the president or being in Congress? What are the,
Okay.
you know,
So the limitations are, one, the Supreme Court can call anything you do unconstitutional. So if you get a little bit overzealous and you start making presidential dictates, the Supreme Court can say that's not constitutional. You're not allowed to do that. Same for the Congress. If they want to pass a bill and the bill were to do something against the Constitution or not be supported by the Constitution, they could say that they would have to either reword the bill or get rid of the bill. The president obviously has to sign any bills, and so if he doesn't sign a bill, then no matter how much work the Congress puts into it, the bill doesn't become a law unless they can get a supermajority to essentially say, we want this bad enough. And for Congress, their major, the major part of Congress is we vote for them, right? So that is the biggest factor for who gets to get in there, is if we vote for them. And that takes people paying attention to their representatives.
what is the these representatives, our congressional representatives, are popular vote. You know,
Yes.
every vote counts.
Yes.
What what's the mechanism of legislation existing?
Trying to get any bill turned into a law is a nightmare.
It starts with a bill being proposed in either house of
Yes, either the House
Congress.
or the Senate. Yep. So whichever house it starts in, the first place it goes is into committee. Committees are a group of senators or representatives that are it's, if you think about it, like an environmental committee would be based on like talking about the environment. There's all sorts of committees, right?
There's a
So
committee for everything.
there's a committee for everything. So
And
the
there's
head of the
probably an
Senate,
everything committee as well.
probably. Now, so the say like the Speaker of the House or the head of the Senate would assign it to a committee, and the committee will look at it. Now, this is where most of our bills die. They die in committee. Like 90% of them die in committee. They don't even get looked at. They just kind of sit on a desk somewhere. Nobody ever looks at them, and they go away, right? If they pass committee, then they'll go onto the floor and they'll get debated, right? And they'll spend all this time debating, you know, changes, of what they're going to do, and it'll go through several like changes. They'll add stuff, they'll take stuff out, and then it'll get voted on. And all it needs is a simple majority in whichever house it's in. And then it has to go back into committee in the other house and go through it all over again. And if any changes are made in the house that it did not start in, it has to go back to the house it started in and has to get voted on again that the changes are okay. And then if finally it makes it through both the houses, all of the committees, all of the changes, it will finally land on the president's desk. And then he gets to sign it or veto it, or what they do is a pocket veto, which is yet again ignoring it.
So,
And yeah.
so we have a proposed bill currently. We'll say an everything bagel bill with. I'm sorry, Master. I can't say that on air. Hi, Master. With a booby committee, we have an everything bagel bill going through a booby committee.
Mm-hmm.
It gets through the committee, goes to the floor. How does it get to the floor? It needs to be brought up for a vote by the leader.
So
Because this
a
is.
calendar. It'll get put on a calendar. Everybody will know that such and such bill is going to be debated on this day. And it'll go through debates, and that's when it'll go through changes. And once all the debate and changes are done, it'll also go on the calendar for the vote. And on that day, they will vote.
And that's when it. And so the Speaker of the House, or the. What's that position in the Senate? The Majority Leader.
Yeah.
They're the ones who propose what gets voted on, right?
They're the one that puts it in the committees. So they can put it in whatever committee they want, which can be devious if you put it in a committee with people who don't know anything about what that bill's talking about. But they'll put it in a committee, and then they will put it on the calendar.
Okay.
But anybody can propose legislation. You could propose legislation.
I can. And to bring it to the floor for a vote.
Well, to bring it to a committee.
To bring it to a
Whatever
committee.
you propose has to go to a committee first, and then once it gets out of committee, they will schedule it for discussion on the floor. But like I said, 90% of bills don't make it to the floor. They get stuck in committee.
Okay. I'm trying to dig into what power the Speaker and the Majority Leader have, because we hear a lot about it in the news.
I mean, they don't have defined powers. I mean, their defined powers are generally as they're supposed to keep everything in order. They're supposed to schedule stuff. They're supposed to put it in committee. They're supposed to keep order. The thing is that they also tend to have a lot of power in their
party.
party, and so a lot of this stuff becomes party politics. Um, and they don't necessarily have any more power than any other senator or representative does. It's just that they might have more information on the bill. They might have more information about the committee they put it in. Um, and people can talk about it and they can decide what they're going to do before it even gets out on the floor.
All right.
But they don't have any. I mean, we get worried about speakers and all these sort of stuff. The reason to be worried about it is if they're ineffective as a speaker, then you have chaos in the House of Representatives. As we've seen, chaos is bad. Things don't get voted on because if you don't have order, things aren't being scheduled, things aren't being taken care of, then nobody's there when it needs to be there.
Okay. I mean, I follow that part.
Well, and they're also leaders for their party. So, a lot of people will follow what they say in that party.
Okay.
But a lot of this stuff is things that come up out of politics, not necessarily out of personal powers that they are provided by their position.
Okay. So Mitch the Turtle McConnell didn't actually have a whole lot of power.
He has power because he can get a bunch of people to do what he asks them to do.
Right.
He has a bunch of power because he can stonewall people. Oh, well, we didn't also bring up what is it called? The power to just like hold up legislation by debating.
The filibuster, Mr. President.
Filibustering used to have to be done physically by people. Like you had to stand there and you had to talk. And if you moved from the podium, your time was done, period. But filibustering has become less of an actual thing you do and more of just a thing you declare, which is what the problem is. Filibustering is also not something that's an actual thing. It's a thing that just kind of came up out of politics. So if you can stand up and get a bunch of your people to stand up and just whine and moan, create chaos for a long period of time by reading Green Eggs and Hams 58 times, you can make it so that no debate ever happens before the vote is done. Nobody can talk to each other, nobody can figure out what this is about, and so there's no discussion on a bill. And you filibustered it. You essentially made it useless because you're just sitting there taking up everybody's time until time's up.
But it doesn't put off the vote on the bill. It doesn't stop it's not supposed to stop the bill from getting voted on. It's not supposed to stop.
I mean, it is actually supposed to stop the bill from being voted on. It runs its time out. I don't remember. I believe it still gets voted on, but if you don't get to change the bill, most people aren't going to vote for it because they're going to want it to be changed in some way or manner.
It does, right.
You don't get to talk about the bill. You don't get to debate about the bill. Nothing gets done about the bill. And time runs out. And sometimes you don't even get the vote because time runs out. There's not enough time, and they'll generally do it like when their sessions are about to end. And so they go home for vacation, and the bill gets forgotten.
Languishes, as they say.
Yes. So it's not so much about power that's given to them by the government. It's what we would think of as like tradition. Like, oh, these are these things that we've always done, so we do them now. And a lot of times it hurts things from actually getting done because a lot of the ways that we traditionally do things is to just disrupt everything and cause chaos. Mind you, this is what our founding fathers wanted. In case you ever forget that, our founding fathers were so paranoid about the idea of a king existing in America that they wanted the government to be completely difficult to do anything in, because
Obscure and
it would
obtuse,
hinder a government from being taken over by a king.
or from being particularly overly effective and taking over itself.
Correct. It was also to keep the central government from becoming too powerful, because a lot of our founding fathers, even if they did not believe that the state should have all the power, which utterly failed when they tried it,
Yeah.
that that the state should still have the majority of the power in the government, right? And
Yes.
so not the people and not the federal government, that the state should be what decides what is best for its people.
Right. And this is why it is shaped this way.
It is. It's shaped to be ineffective and to be very difficult to go through, because if you really, really want it, obviously you would do it.
Right.
We know how well that works, but
Right.
it is created that way so that the states do get the majority of the power, or it's supposed to. The problem is the states are just as ineffective as the central government, and doesn't always know what's best for its people either. So
We're looking at you, Florida. We're looking at you.
Yeah, but they do. The states have a lot of powers, and for a while the states have been losing their powers because, of course, if the federal government can take power, it's not going to give it back. So there is something to be said with states have been losing a lot of power lately. But a lot of the ways that states have been losing power is because they've been taking money from the federal government. You can't have it both ways. You either have the power over your state, or you take money from the federal government. You can't do both, because as soon as you take money from the federal government, there are strings attached.
And this is how the federal government controls the state governments.
Yes, because the state government's the one that's supposed to have complete control over, say, schools, right? But nobody thinks that states have complete control over schools, because they don't really, because states get money, a lot of money, from the federal government to do certain things in schools, like the No Child Left Behind thing that came with Bush, right? So the states can either take the money from the federal government and do exactly what they tell them to do, or they don't take the money and then they have to find that money all on their own, but then they have to tax their people, and then people who get taxed tend to get mad at the states, and then it starts a cycle of the states not having power anyhow, because people get voted out because they tax people. So if you actually like states being in power, you should be more than willing to pay that sales tax, that Virginia income tax, those property taxes. That's the way you make your state have enough money to have power to not have strings to the federal government. And you have to elect people who believe in that sort of stuff, if you believe that the federal government should have less power than the state. You can't have it every way you want it. You can't have low taxes and then also have a strong state. That's not how it works.
Right. Now, let's, actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's talk about taxes for a second. Now,
Everyone loves talking about taxes.
I am, a hot take. I love paying taxes. I am all about the taxes. I think that, it's a privilege to be able to pay into a system that works. I use the term work lightly, but I do feel very, I do feel like our taxes are a good thing. Now, I also I heard a piece on NPR recently that pointed out that Biden might be running on a platform of taxation that a lot of people are no longer against no longer against raising taxes across the board. People are starting to be more okay with the idea of raising taxes on rich people and corporations. And that may no longer be the political poison that it once was. So now, at a very basic level, what is the purpose of our taxes? Why do we pay taxes? Why is it a good idea to pay our taxes? And why are they not going where they're supposed to?
Okay. So what I tell my kids, my students, and we just got off of taxes, so you can imagine they were very thrilled about the whole idea because I showed them pay stubs and everything.
Who's FICA? Why are they taking all my money?
Yes, exactly. So no one likes taxes because no one wants to have less money than they believe they earned. What I'm going to tell you is that's not the tax's fault. That is not. You are allowed to be upset about where your taxes are spent. You're allowed to be upset that you don't get enough money to be able to live after paying for taxes. Do not blame this on the taxes because the taxes themselves are an amazing idea. Okay? We live in a civilization, which means that we are living with millions upon millions of people all living together, packed in on each other. And we can't do that without some sort of support. And we cannot also depend on people to do their fair share because they won't. There will always be that person that's like, well, I'm not going to do it because it doesn't directly impact me. And then there's a bunch of people who are like, well, they're not doing it, so I'm not going to do it. And then everything falls apart, as the libertarians soon found out when they tried it on their own. What taxes do is, if you think about it, our economic flow is from households to businesses, right? We know about this. We pay the businesses give us goods, and then we provide resources to the businesses and labor and land and all this stuff, and then they pay us income, and it goes around and round and round. Well, in the middle of that is the government. The government buys those goods, and the government buys our labor and provides people with an income and provides businesses with business and also produces things like schools and fire departments and roads and housing for people who are unfortunate and hospitals for veterans and all sorts of things that you see every day that you probably don't even think of being provided to you by the government, whether it is local, state, or federal level. Every time you drive on an interstate, that was provided to you by the federal level. Every time you drive around your neighborhood, that is provided either by the state or the local level. Okay, that's something that they do for you. Now, when they do that, they're hiring people, probably people that live right next door to you, to create those roads. So they're paying their income, they're paying them money. Right? So every time we get all of this, it's not free. We pay for this in our taxes. You are paying for some people's incomes with your taxes. You're paying for roads with your taxes. You're paying for housing. You're paying for airports. You're paying for things you don't even know every day with your taxes. That makes this society run as well as it possibly can with a bunch of humans in it. If we were to
Because
stop paying taxes and we started relying on people to do what is required of them, it would all fall apart. There would be potholes. There probably wouldn't even be a working road. Matter of fact, more than just even potholes. There would be no libraries. There would be no schools unless they were privatized and people were making money off of them.
I mean,
So
which
you would
they
still be
are, but
paying
that's
the
a whole
money.
nother
Yeah,
thing.
but it's
Mhm.
the idea that even if you decided that you didn't want to pay taxes, you would still be paying money because you would still have to pay for those people to pave your roads. You would still have to pay for your kids to go to school. You would still have to pay for all of those things, but eventually you would
And
just be paying them to a private business and it wouldn't be nearly as efficient.
right, and there's stuff that a government provides that you can't exactly privatize.
I mean, you don't particularly want to privatize it. You definitely don't want to privatize war.
Right.
I mean, that's
That's
led to all sorts of problems. I
Yeah.
mean, as much as you might or might not agree with our military complex, it provides jobs, it provides innovation, it provides security for our country. And that's something that you don't necessarily want to privatize because if you do and it's no longer in the hands of the government and it's in the hands of an individual, then that person has their own personal army. People aren't allowed to have their own personal army
it's never a good
for very
idea.
good reasons. It's never a good idea. So the government provides these things and we pay them taxes. We pay them income taxes, we pay them sales taxes, we pay them property taxes so that they can provide those things. Now, what I say to people is you are paying these people. You are paying Congress, you're paying the president, you are paying your representatives, and you should demand things from them because you are paying their bills. And you should not be paying for them if you don't like what they've done. Period. Because you pay their bills. And you are paying them to pass laws and legislation that is supposed to help you. And if they don't do that, then you need to be miffed about it. You should be upset if your taxes aren't going into things that your society needs. It's not the taxes' fault. The taxes are just money, and you should be okay with spending them.
It
It's
is,
that you should be upset with where they're putting that money.
and that is the fault of the people who are, who have
In power.
in power, who have been elected,
By you,
which is why,
possibly.
voting matters because it is how we can. I am surrounded by animals all of a sudden.
It's how you can, it's your own checks and balance.
Right.
If somebody is not doing what you like, you have the opportunity to fire them. So talk about this just for a moment. Like when I was talking to the kids about this TikTok thing. Now, whether or not I'm I'm not worried about TikTok. I don't use it enough for it to matter. But if you do, then you find out which representatives that represent you that voted against TikTok functioning in America, and you don't reelect them. You vote for the other person.
Can you
You don't
also
reelect.
write them and call them and annoy
You
them?
can write them and call them, but I'll tell you what happened with TikTok. They unplugged their phones. I don't believe that should be allowed.
TikTok.
I pay your bills. You need to answer that phone when I call.
So the representatives unplugged their phones.
Yeah, they stopped answering people because there was just too much unhappiness and there was too many shrill women calling and kids, and it was just we don't want to talk to them anymore.
In jest, we try not to say shrill women because that is a very negative
No,
stereotype.
I'm pretty sure they said hysterical, which is even
Oh,
better.
man. What a.
Um,
Oh, oh.
but it's a matter of these people in Congress, in your state Congress, in your state, I mean, in your local government. These are people you pay for. These
And
are people
elect.
you elect. And even if you don't like the other option, do not vote for them again. If they've done something wrong and you've written them and you've called them and you've done your due diligence and elections come back up, do not vote for the people who wronged you. They're not going to do better next time. Maybe even get a group of people together and try to find someone to represent you, to put into that position. Do some grassroots stuff if you have time, if you have the energy. It's not easy. But what I'm saying is that we can't keep reelecting people or just ignoring elections, because sometimes these people think that they can get away with whatever, but we're paying their bills. We're paying their money. They get an income because we pay our taxes. So it's not the taxes' fault. It is, you should be demanding more of the people who are spending your taxes.
All right. I agree with all of that. It is,
And frankly, we're all at that point, right? We're all at that point that we are doing our part. We're spending our taxes because we can't get away from it.
right.
And we just want everybody who can cheat and steal to just do their fair share.
Right.
Right. And that's where the businesses and the upper 1% come in. It's not that, and it's not even that they're not paying their fair share. The problem is that over time, your government has allowed them to get away with things. Your government has lowered the taxes on them because, frankly, they're their
Reaganomics.
friends.
Reaganomics.
And
Trickle down.
well, and we won't even talk about trickle down because we know that failed. It's been proven that it's failed, and now we have to fix it. So the problem is that all of these people who are, because I had this question with one of my students. Well, if they're only making like $160,000 a year, how are they so rich? And I told them, I said, they're not rich because they're in Congress, hon. They're rich because they were rich before they got into Congress.
They got into Congress because they're rich, not the other way around.
And not only that, when you get into Congress, as we found out, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you have inside knowledge on the stock market.
Yeah.
So you can also make amazing percentages on the stock market because you know things that I'm not going to know because I'm not in a committee about energy.
There's also graft and kickback.
There's graft and there's kickback. But even if people are doing everything that is legal, which includes owning stocks, which they should not own stocks in anything that even touches any committee that they're in, because that is insider information. They're allowed to.
Martha Stewart went to prison for that
jail
crap.
for it, but let me tell you, there's a bunch of ones, both Democrats and Republicans, who know a good week before we do what we should be doing with our stocks. And so not only do they start off rich when they get into the Congress or when they become president, they only make more money because they know what's going on before we do. And they know how, and they can afford people to make these investments for them. They can call up people and say, oh, I'm on the Energy Commission and we're going to be starting to fund more wind energy. Why don't you put some more, buy up some more stocks in this particular company, because we know that we're going to start subsidizing them. we're not going to know that information until it comes out in the Washington Post or the New York Times or our local newspaper or
NPR,
online. But they
NPR.
know it a week ahead of.
We
NPR, where, yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter where we get it from, but they're going to get it there first because they see this bill come through their committee before we even see it. And they know how they're going to vote on it. And they know that the changes they're going to make on it and possibly the subsidies that they're going to put on it. So it's the rich get richer because they have the inside information on it.
Congress doesn't have any rules against this, but does the
No.
FTC, the Federal Trade Commission.
You mean all of the commissions and agencies that we have defunded over the years where they can't possibly keep up with everything, including the IRS? So, like I said, it's about demanding better from your government. Our government has slowly and surely, since the time of Nixon, deregulated all of our government, meaning that businesses and bad actors are not being paid attention to as often because they don't have the people to put on it. Right? As much as everybody hates the IRS cannot go after the people that are not paying their taxes, meaning also the 1%, because they got to get lawyers for that stuff.
Right.
You defund the IRS, you take away a bunch of their people, and now they can't do it as much and as often. And it sounds great. Oh, not have to pay for all those people. It'll lower our taxes. But in the end, it's a spiral that gets rid of us having taxes that we need.
And right. We've covered why the taxes are actually important. So.
Exactly. So it's a matter of, there's nobody watching our government anymore.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't strictly civics because we have to.
No, it's not strictly civics.
When we talk to students, we give them the information and they have to make their own.
Yes.
Their own, judgments on it. I'm not going to, try to make a child who is showing conservatism to be less conservative. I'm merely going to give them the information so that because even people who are conservative have friends and family they care about and might have a few different opinions from the conservative mainstream because they have those friends and family they care about. And they have to know that some of these things benefit people that are outside of just themselves. And, generally people do. Generally people, are like, yeah, I would like my grandma to have that Medicare, but I also think I would like my friend's grandma to have that Medicare too. So.
Right. Take a quick moment to say hi to Dassin. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so let's. I've been saving the big question for the end here.
Okay.
And this is all. I blame this all on Kat. What? You're the one who wrote it down. What are some major differences between other democratic governments and the U.S.? And what system seems to work the best?
Mm-hmm. What?
Okay, yeah, I did say that.
Yeah, you did, I'm sure. But everybody does need to know that there's a whole wide world out there with a lot of different governments in it. And mostly a lot of different economies in it, right? So, unfortunately, America went through a communist scare, and it took socialism with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the other ways that governments work. And I want everybody to kind of try to remember that because if they're American, they might have some unknown bias against these that they might not even know that they have. Okay.
So keep an open
Um,
mind, friends.
keep an open mind. Okay, so America is a free market economy. We're a capitalist government. We believe that people will buy what they want to buy, and businesses will only create what people want to buy, and that if people buy more of it, that the price might go up, and that they'll just buy less of it, and then the price will go down, and that in our government, that the government doesn't have to really do a lot because it's all self-maintaining. That's not how it actually works, because as we've known lately, that we do need some government interference because all of our companies don't necessarily have our best interest at heart.
Right.
But government-wise, we're a capitalist government. So we believe in freedom, and we believe that people should be free to buy what they want to buy, and businesses should be free to sell what they want to sell, and that people should be able to talk and have, you know, not have a lot of suppression in that manner, right?
Right.
Then there's communism, which is generally a command market. I mean, a command economy, which is the government decides what's going to be created. They are the holders of the resources, not the people or the businesses, which in America, that's who technically holds all the resources, right, are the people. In a communist government, the government holds all the resources for the people and makes decisions for them because they have a wider view of what's needed for the entire country, right? And so they decide what gets manufactured and what gets sold. And communist governments tend to have more even distribution of wealth, whereas free markets, whoever works the hardest or whoever makes the most money deserves to make the most money, right? In a communist government, everybody deserves a house, everybody deserves food, everybody deserves a job.
Egalitarian.
Right? It's egalitarian. And in China, matter of fact, everybody does get a house and everybody does get a job and everybody does get food. They might not get exactly what they want. They might not always get it the way that they want it, but everybody is guaranteed these things, right?
Right.
Although, like America, China is not strictly just communist, and America is not strictly just capitalist, because nowadays there's mixtures, right? So China has started allowing businesses to make some of the things that they want to make, and that there's more openness and freedoms with that, right?
And
It's hard.
America subsidizes certain
Yes, and
industries.
America has certain industries that they subsidize in order to get them to make what they want them to make.
Corn.
And
Mm.
yeah, like oil or corn, yeah, corn, soybeans, those kinds of things, because we use those to make ethanol, right? So
Right.
we subsidize and we make it cheaper for them to make it because we want them to make it. Whereas China just tells them that this is what they have to make if they need it. And then you have a socialist system, which is what most of the EU is, right?
Right.
So socialist systems are a kind of combination of command and free market, where you have a free market, but you also have a government that owns a lot of the land and a lot of the resources. And they allow businesses to also create things, and they have a fairly large market, and they allow a lot of freedoms, but they also provide a lot of the same stuff communism does, in that they provide them health care. They might not give them housing, but they provide like subsidies to allow you to get housing. They have certain programs that act as a to catch you if you fall in that system, right?
Social
Whereas America does
programs.
social programs. America has some of those social programs because we did go through the Great Depression, which the only way we got out of it was by creating those social programs.
Right.
Um, but in places like the EU, there are more of them, and they're more robust, and they're more heavily funded, generally by higher taxes. But to be honest, the taxes aren't that much higher in a
For
socialist country than it is in
for
America.
individuals. For individuals.
For individuals, correct. The majority of the taxes come from, well, the rich people don't really like socialism very
Because they
much because
pay
a
the
lot of
most
socialists,
taxes.
as they will pay the most taxes. They do not get as many loopholes. The
It's a
thing that you have to
progressive tax
understand,
system, meaning that it
yeah,
taxes more wealth more,
and it's
less wealth
progressive,
less.
whereas ours is progressive as well. Our progressive does not progress as high
Right.
as a socialist system does.
Our
Um,
tax system, while progressive, is as close to not being progressive as possible while still
I mean, our
being
range is from 0 to say like 39%, as to where in a socialist country it might be like from 10 to like 70%.
right.
Um, and so yeah, if you're in the upper 1%, that's a lot of money. But mind you, it's only a lot of money if you make a lot of money, and it's not
Right.
even all of your money. It's just like the last 10% of your money that's getting taxed at
Right.
70%. So but socialist countries tend to have a more robust central government, right?
Which is
Um,
sort of this Democrat centralized government idea.
mhm. And the
Th-
other thing that they have that we don't have is a multi-party system. A lot of these countries, like Italy and Greece and Germany, they have
well,
10, 20.
the two that we've already covered are Canada and the UK.
Okay.
Um,
Um, so some of these systems have multiple parties, and in order for them to form a government every election, they have to make alliances with other parties to get a certain
Oh,
percentage of the vote.
right.
So this requires a certain amount of
Now
participation in
this
government.
is also not the, in Canada they have this first past the post thing where it's
Okay.
whoever gets the majority of the votes, even if it's not, you know,
Oh yeah, even though it's not 51% or whatever,
right,
right?
right,
America is very set on it being half of its population. But I want to remind you, not everybody votes. So it's not even half of the population
right.
when half the population votes for people. In some places, like in Australia, it is mandatory to vote. You will get fined if you do not vote. Um, it
I I think
Voting
that
is a
that
responsibility in there.
I think that that is on its surface very attractive, but I think that it would be something that would be used against
In
uh,
America, it could be. In
underprivileged
places,
people. I could see
yes,
it
but in
being something that is basically like
a poll tax.
yeah,
Yeah.
designed
Yeah. So in
to,
America,
designed to make it so that you have to pay not to vote because
yeah.
more than likely they'll find a way to keep you from voting as
Yes,
well. It's like,
you're right. If that could happen, except that's but because we only have a single day to vote in America and it's not even a
right.
holiday. Whereas in other places, you have like a week or two to vote.
Although that is kind of changing with the early voting.
It is. And it really does need to. There's too many people to have these voting locations packed like they do because people aren't going to be able to go to them
Right,
until 4 o'clock when they get out of work or seven
right.
o'clock. And so it becomes a line system, and it's only if you really want it that you're going to stand in that line.
or if you have the forethought of getting the mail-in ballot or whatever.
Yeah,
Although now
exactly. So
that does seem to be a change that is stuck, at least here
it
in
depends on
Virginia.
the state. Yeah, it depends on the state because some states are trying to make this very difficult for de-enfranchisement reasons. Um, but our government is one of the most permissive governments to the rich that exist. And everybody seems to think that, oh, well, if we tax them too much, they're going to go somewhere else. Let me tell you, there's not a lot of other places in the world they can go that they're going to get as many tax benefits as they get here. They go to China, China's going to tax them, trust me. China gets a lot of their money from their businesses. They go to the EU, it's going to be the same thing. You might be thinking of India, but let me tell you, everyone is catching up with this thing which is businesses trying to find the cheapest place to go. And when
Right.
they do that, they tend to really disrupt their economies when they do that. So
Right.
there's a lot of countries that are making these changes that are making it
More
not a very good
expensive to do
place
business there.
for them to do business. And America is one of the few places that it's really beneficial to do business. Not only do you have a huge consumer base, but you also get a lot of tax breaks here. So, as much as we love our capitalism, capitalism has a tendency, a very strong tendency, to make the rich very rich and stratify people into very low classes after that. You're either really rich or you're poor. There's not a lot in between. And if you think you're not poor, I would really sit there and think about it because not being poor in this country
Yeah.
is very hard not to be because everybody that I know is paycheck to paycheck. They're one roofing accident away from losing any savings that they had. So that's not well off, you know. So America is a capitalist economy and a capitalist government, and capitalist governments tend to be very permissive of rich people. That's what they want. That's what tends to be created. Whereas socialism and communism do not either communism wants it gone completely. They do not believe that there should be any difference between one person and the other. That frankly, everybody should be if should be divided equally upon everybody, whether that happens or
Fully
not.
egalitarian.
Yeah, is an egalitarian. Whereas socialism is like, we're not going to, make you divide up your money, but we're just going to tax you really high so that now you have to put some of that money back into the economy versus just holding it in a stock market or in an account somewhere, which is what happens in capitalism.
Right.
So our government is very bipolar compared to a lot of governments.
It's
Although not
bipolar in general.
Yeah, it is bipolar in general. We only have two parties. A lot of other places have multiple parties, unless
Yes.
you are a communist, which then generally the only party that matters is that communist party.
But there are different
You,
factions within
there
the.
are different there's always going to be factions, right?
Right. Right.
We have been told for a very long time, at least I was when I was younger, that you're very fortunate to be born in America. There's no better place in the world. You could have been born in in Europe where everything's falling apart, or in Africa where, everybody's poor and we just get told all of these horrible things from around the world. That's just kind of falling apart now because we can talk to everybody around the world and we find out that everybody is kind of living the same kind of life. And our government, in the end, as much as we should care about our government, what really matters in the end is the individual and how we interact with individuals. The government is great. the government does things or it doesn't do things, and it frustrates us. But the things that impact us the most are the people around us and what they choose to do and not choose to do. So, as much as we should be aware of who we're voting for and aware of all these changes, we can't get too panicked about it because, you still have your friend down the street, you still have your friends at school and at work, and these people are still going to be there on your side no matter who is becoming president. And your local economy, your local businesses, your local government is really what's going to impact you the most. So you should be paying attention to those the most. And it's what we tend to pay attention to the least, which is unfortunate.
Well said.
Yeah. So if there's anything I can say to anybody out there,
Vote
if
and
you do
pay your
not pay
taxes.
attention, go pay your taxes. And if you're not paying attention to the local government right now, meaning your school board, your board of supervisors, you need to be paying attention to them now because a lot of those people have a direct impact on your daily life.
Vote in your local elections. Get to know your local representatives.
Buy locally, take care of your economy, take care of your local economy. And if we all do that, our world becomes a better place because local becomes international.
I would like to come back and talk about the more local side of government.
Mm-hmm.
If you at some point, if you have the time, I think that would be a little much to cover here.
Yeah, and I would have to do some research and stuff like that. But
Right.
yes, there is a lot that goes on locally that we should be paying attention to.
And seems to have a bigger effect on our immediate lives than
Yeah.
these big national things that are making the splashy headlines.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, we'll leave it here. Thank you for joining us. It has
Thank
been...
you for allowing me to just ramble on about some of my favorite subjects.
Well, we've covered Canadian UK, not nearly as in depth, but to some degree. So it felt right that we cover US. And I am really, really glad that I know someone. I happen to be dear, dear friends with somebody who happens to be so well educated on the subject. So thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for joining us. And we've come to the time in the show where I say, don't forget to stick around for the raid. And as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.